Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, I'm taking a closer look at the 35mm f1.4 Leica Summilux Pre-ASPH. This lens was introduced in 1960 and produced all the way up until 1995. And the Leica Store here in Munich in the Briennerstr was kind enough to loan me this lens for a short trip to Marrakech. And of course, for me, this was a great opportunity to take the lens through its paces and give it a try in a, for me, completely new and interesting environment. And I shot some Ilford Delta 100 and some Kodak Gold 200. Leica calls this lens the True King of Bokeh in reference of the community name of the Leica Summicron 35mm, which is always called the King of Bokeh. And knowing that, I diligently took notes after each shot, writing down the f-stop that I used in order to show that to you here as well in the review. Because of course, the selected f-stop plays a crucial role in determining this lens and also how the character changes across the range of different f-stops available. Please note that I'm reviewing the second version of the original vintage lens and not the reissue steel rim that was introduced in 2022. And this vintage lens is another interesting investment piece from a collector perspective, but also of the perspective of someone who just appreciates shooting vintage lenses with their special character. But this one comes in quite expensive, with a price range between 2,700 to 3,500 euro today. So quite a price tag, and of course it always comes down to condition and how many previous owners it saw and so on. Fortunately, there are plenty of lenses available because of the long production time that it saw, over 30 years, so there are plenty of lenses available. And of course, from a collector perspective, there are also some special versions, like a titanium one that was very limited and so on, but we will get to that in a minute. If you're just out there wanting to shoot it, you can really tap into a large pool of lenses. So now let's take a closer look at this lens, the build quality, the optical design, and also, of course, its performance. When the 35mm Summilux was introduced, it was the lightest and smallest professional 35mm lens available. It only weighs around 200 grams and is so small that it doesn't block the viewfinder at all. The original version of this lens came in chrome and was only produced between 1961 and 1966, and this version also came with an infinity lock and is easily recognizable because of the chrome version and the infinity lock. And this one came in two different versions, one without the so-called eye viewfinder attachment for the M3 and one with it. And please note that you can also use these viewfinder attachments on other Leica M models. There's a guide for that if you're interested in it. So there is compatibility for it, but as you know, it was originally designed for the Leica M3 to compensate for the different viewfinder magnification. This version is limited basically to around 1,500 lenses that were produced in that relatively short time frame. The majority of the lenses available come in black and without the infinity lock and were produced between 1967 and 1995, so for a pretty long time. And this version here is basically the one that you will find on the market if you're looking for it and if you're not a collector but just a regular shooter. What is interesting is that it was updated in comparison to the earlier one when it comes to filter compatibility. So this here is compatible with the Series 7 filters that can be attached to the lens hood. And for the earlier version, it was significantly more, it was trickier to use it with filters. And then, yeah, it was basically produced for almost 30 years until it was replaced by the spherical models that came afterwards. And what I found interesting is that this model and the later spherical model were sold simultaneously for quite some time to get rid of old stock that was still remaining of the previous version, and also because it remained popular among people, potential buyers, because they simply appreciated the very compact form factor And of course, the spherical model is, from an optical performance standpoint, superior to this one, but it's also significantly larger. What I also found interesting is that all the lenses here come with a 7 elements and 5 groups design and consist of comparatively thin layers of glass, which also explains the light weight. And all of these lenses are single coated in amber and blue tones, and there were hardly any design changes in that long period of time, of production time. And most of the lenses were produced from 1961 to 1990 in Midland, Ontario, so they are made in Canada. And only after 1990 were a few of the lenses produced in Germany, and some also special editions produced there. And these come, of course, with the arguably nicer LG 1050 font for the inscriptions and the Made in Germany inscription. So if you're a collector, of course, these are more interesting to you. And speaking of collector pieces, I've already touched on the titanium version that was specifically produced to match the Leica M6 titanium. That is, of course, interesting from a collector perspective. And then there was a special commemorative edition for Leica 1913 to 1983 that came with a Leica M4P, together with a Leica M4P, commemorating that special occasion, and these were limited to 150 pieces, and of course are heavily sought after from a collector's perspective as well. But if you're just in the market for that lens and want to shoot it, I would recommend to go for the black version without the eye attachment, and then you can have plenty of choices typically. So what about the performance? From my perspective, the lens offers a really classic and unique bokeh when shot wide open at f1.4. To me, this is really a characteristic, fantastic look. And yet, once you stop down to f2 or 2.8, it just performs like any Leica lens and how you would expect a Leica lens to perform. So really good sharpness and so on. But if you look at the details when shot wide open at f1.4, of course, sharpness is kind of focused around the center of the frame and it deteriorates towards the corners. You also see some fall off in the corners, and depending on your subject that becomes visible. Sometimes it's more like a nice vignetting that really draws you into the frame, but sometimes you can also see like it's really, it catches your eye in maybe not a good way. But again, once you stop down to f2, this effect already disappears, and by f2.8 it has disappeared almost completely, and also sharpness and contrast increase significantly. The sweet spot when it comes to sharpness and contrast is probably around f5.6 or f8. Then you really have sharpness across the entire frame. You don't have any kind of vignetting or fall off, so really, really nice. That special effect when shot wide open at f1.4 naturally comes from all the spherical aberrations and coma that the lens produces. This offers creatively a great opportunity to take unique images, in my opinion, and make a conscious effort which f-stop to choose for any given situation. Of course, this effect is naturally more pronounced in daylight than it would be in darker situations. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to take so many images in darker situations, but you can imagine that it really creates a really nice, dreamy atmosphere in the dark when shot with, let's say, a film pushed to ISO 3000 to 100 or something like that. Then all these, a black and white film, for instance, then all these effects would not be disturbing, but really create a fantastic dreamlike look. And overall, in my opinion, this lens invites you to experiment with the f-stop and the different looks that the lens can create. And in my opinion, once you stop it down a little bit, the bokeh becomes less busy, you get really nice sharpness and contrast. And overall, I personally also really liked the colors of the lens it produces. They're slightly muted here and there, but if you have a punchy color film like I did here, and have an environment that offers so many beautiful colors like the markets in Marrakech and so on, you get beautiful images, a lot of detail, a lot of micro contrast, and you can see how much quality this vintage lens is able to produce. So what about the handling and my personal impressions after a few days of using it? I think the lens feels and looks fantastic, and I particularly enjoyed using the focusing tab and how super quick the focusing was with that. I also really enjoyed the compact form factor and how unobtrusive the lens is on a Leica M6, and also how it looks on a Leica M6. Interestingly, it feels like it was made for that camera, despite the fact that, of course, it was created earlier. And of course, I can imagine it looking fantastic on an earlier model or a modern Leica MP or MA as well. To me, optically or from a design perspective, it really is a timeless lens. And it worked particularly well for taking unobtrusive street shots. Nobody really notices the lens. It's not a large piece of glass. It's not something that, yeah, you're pointing at people's faces and they're staring at you. It's rather something that lets you shoot from the hip or kind of really very quickly focus, take a shot and move on. Nobody really notices that you took an image. So ideal for street photography from my perspective. Optically and in terms of performance, I had to think of Walter Mandler's successor at Leica, Peter Kabel, and his famous quote that the f-stop on a Leica lens shouldn't be used to control the exposure, but rather to control how the image looks like. And I think for this lens, this is particularly true. The selected f-stop makes all the difference. If you want, you can create dreamlike images because of all the spherical aberrations the lens produces and get a really special characteristic look out of your image. And if you want to have a great image that is tack sharp across the entire frame, you just stop down to f5.6 or f8 and you get that. So I personally really appreciated that versatility and what you can create with it. So if you like shooting street shots and if you have the need to sometimes shoot in darker situations as well, and you can justify that price tag and your heart beats for vintage lenses, then I can definitely recommend taking a look at this lens. The only real downside here is the hefty price tag and of around 3,000 euros at the moment, depending on quality, condition, provenance and so on. If you are more like me and a 50mm shooter and you cannot quite justify this kind of investment for a 35mm lens that you wouldn't use so often, then it's really a tricky choice. It's a really big investment from my perspective. The only upside I see is that Leica lenses are prone to retain their value, so there is at least the possibility that you purchase it today and you might be able, if you treat it well, to sell it for the same price further down the road or even a bit more, because it's retaining its value, or it's increasing its value because it's a heavily sought after lens. And it retains its quality and it's appreciated in the community. That's the only upside that I see. But if you're really just in the market for another 35mm lens to complement your lens lineup, then I can understand if you're not looking in that direction, but rather go for something significantly less expensive. But overall, beautiful vintage lens that I can highly recommend taking a look at. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and my review of the 35mm Leica Summilux Pre-ASPH. A very compact and beautiful small light lens that offers very special dreamlike results when shot wide open and really solid and reliable results once you stop down a little bit. Of course, the results don't quite live up to the spherical version of the lens in terms of sharpness, micro contrast and so on, and yet it is just a really interesting vintage Leica piece that is definitely worth taking a look. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like it and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon.